I'm Sarah Chen, and I'm 29 years old. Last Christmas, my entire family laughed at what they thought was my biggest failure in life. My cousin Jessica called me a wannabe entrepreneur, living in Fantasyland. My uncle Richard said I should get a real job like normal people. My own mother suggested I move back home because clearly I wasn't making it in the real world. What they didn't know was that I was secretly running a multi-million-dollar company. What happened when my assistant accidentally revealed the truth in front of everyone changed our family dynamics forever, and what I did next shocked them even more than the revelation itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. To understand why my family's mockery cut so deep that Christmas evening, you need to know the elaborate web of secrecy I'd been weaving for the past 4 years. It wasn't intentional deception at first. It started as protective privacy that gradually evolved into something much more complex. I grew up in Sacramento, California, in what most people would consider a successful middle-class family. My father, David Chen, worked as a senior accountant at a major firm, while my mother, Linda Chen, managed the local branch of a community bank. We lived in a comfortable 2-story house in the suburbs, complete with a manicured lawn and a golden retriever named Bailey. On paper, we were the picture of American suburban success, but beneath that polished exterior lay a family obsessed with conventional achievement and public perception. Every conversation at our dinner table revolved around who was getting promoted, who bought a bigger house, who had the most prestigious job title. My parents measured success through a very narrow lens: corporate ladder climbing, steady paychecks, and impressive job titles that sounded good at cocktail parties. My extended family operated on the same frequency. Uncle Richard worked in middle management at a tech company and never let anyone forget his corner office. Aunt Monica taught high school but constantly reminded everyone she had a master's degree. Cousin Jessica worked in pharmaceutical sales and treated every family gathering like a networking event, name-dropping clients and bragging about her commission checks. Growing up in this environment, I learned early that your worth was directly tied to how your career sounded when you explained it to others. Being a teacher was respectable. Being a lawyer was impressive. Being a doctor was the golden standard. But being an entrepreneur? That was code for unemployed dreamer who couldn't handle a real job. This became crystal clear during my college years at UC Davis, where I studied business administration. While my classmates were fighting for internships at prestigious companies, I was quietly building my first small business, a tutoring service that connected college students with high school kids struggling in math and science. It started with just me helping a few neighbors' kids, but within 6 months, I had 15 tutors working under me and over 60 regular students. When I told my parents about my little venture during Thanksgiving of my junior year, their reaction was underwhelming. Dad looked concerned and asked when I was going to get serious about finding a real career path. Mom worried that I was wasting time on side projects, instead of focusing on landing a good entry-level position at an established company after graduation. "Entrepreneurship is risky, honey," Mom had said, patting my hand like I was a child who'd suggested becoming a professional unicorn trainer. "You need stability, benefits, a 401k. These little side businesses are fine as hobbies, but you can't build a life on them." Uncle Richard, who was visiting for the holiday, chimed in with his expertise. "Sarah's always been a dreamer. Remember when she wanted to be a marine biologist? Then a chef? Now it's business owner. She'll figure out what she really wants to do eventually." The dismissive laughter that followed that comment planted a seed of defiance in me that would grow over the next several years. They saw my ambition as childish fantasy. They viewed my entrepreneurial spirit as an inability to commit to real work. That Thanksgiving dinner became a turning point, not because I gave up on my dreams, but because I decided to prove them wrong without giving them the satisfaction of watching my journey. After graduation, while my classmates were updating LinkedIn profiles with their new corporate positions, I quietly expanded my tutoring business into something much bigger. I rebranded it as Academic Excellence Solutions and began targeting affluent families who were willing to pay premium prices for guaranteed results. Instead of just math and science, we expanded into test prep, college application consulting, and even academic coaching for struggling college students. The business model was brilliant in its simplicity. We charged premium rates, delivered exceptional results, and operated primarily through word-of-mouth referrals in wealthy communities. Our clients were investment bankers' kids, tech executives' teenagers, and entertainment industry families who valued discretion and results over flashy marketing. Meanwhile, at family gatherings, I played the role of the struggling entrepreneur. When asked about work, I'd vaguely mention helping students with their academics and trying to build something in the education space. I'd complain about the challenges of small business and working long hours for uncertain pay. I never lied outright, but I certainly didn't correct their assumptions about my financial situation. This deception was surprisingly easy to maintain. I lived modestly, not because I had to, but because I preferred it. I drove a reliable but unremarkable Honda Civic, lived in a nice but not ostentatious apartment, and dressed professionally but not expensively. When family members offered unsolicited advice about getting a real job or thinking about graduate school for better opportunities, I'd nod appreciatively and change the subject. By the end of my second year post-graduation, Academic Excellence Solutions was generating over $500,000 in annual revenue. I had a team of 23 tutors, contracts with 3 private schools, and a waiting list of clients willing to pay our premium rates. But at Family Christmas that year, I still played the role of Sarah, the struggling entrepreneur who was still trying to make it work. The third year brought explosive growth. We expanded into online platforms, developed proprietary curriculum materials, and began licensing our methods to other tutoring companies across the country. Revenue jumped to $1.8 million. I hired my first full-time employee, a brilliant operations manager named Marcus Williams, who had an MBA from Stanford and had previously worked at a Fortune 500 consulting firm. But at family gatherings, I maintained my cover story. When cousin Jessica bragged about her 6-figure pharmaceutical sales income, I'd smile and say something like, "That's amazing, Jess. I'm still working on getting my business to that level of stability." When Uncle Richard offered to put in a good word for me at his tech company, I'd thank him graciously while internally calculating that my monthly profit was probably more than his quarterly salary. The fourth year changed everything. We went fully digital with our premium services, developed an AI-powered learning assessment tool, and secured contracts with several major school districts. Academic Excellence Solutions became AES Education Technologies, and we were no longer just a tutoring company. We were an educational technology platform with subscription services, licensing deals, and a growing portfolio of digital learning tools. Revenue hit $4.2 million. I had 43 employees, including Marcus as my chief operating officer, a head of technology, a marketing director, and a team of content developers. We moved into a sleek office space in downtown Sacramento, complete with modern furniture, state-of-the-art technology, and a conference room where I held weekly meetings with department heads. The irony was delicious. While my family continued to view me as the disappointing relative who couldn't figure out her career path, I was running board meetings, reviewing quarterly profit reports, and making strategic decisions that affected dozens of employees and thousands of students across multiple states. Marcus often joked about the situation during our private conversations. "I still can't believe your family thinks you're struggling," he'd say, while reviewing our latest financial projections. "Do they have any idea that you're probably the most successful person at their dinner table?" "That's exactly why I don't tell them," I'd reply. "The moment they know, everything changes. Suddenly, I'm not Sarah, their niece, who's trying to figure things out. I'm Sarah, the successful CEO who should be picking up every dinner check and funding their kids' college expenses." But maintaining this deception was becoming increasingly complex. I had to be careful about my stories, my purchases, my travel. When the company sent me to educational conferences in New York and Los Angeles, I told family I was attending some small business workshops. When we celebrated hitting major revenue milestones with team dinners at expensive restaurants, I made sure no photos ended up on social media where family members might see them. The most challenging part was navigating conversations about my future. Family members constantly offered advice about pivoting to something more stable or considering corporate opportunities. They'd share job openings they'd heard about, suggest I look into graduate programs, or recommend I consider more traditional career paths before I got too old to start over. Each piece of well-meaning advice felt like a small knife twist, not because it hurt my feelings, but because it revealed how completely they misunderstood my actual situation. Here I was, running a multi-million-dollar company with dozens of employees, making strategic decisions that impacted thousands of students, and they were suggesting I apply for entry-level marketing positions at local companies. As Christmas of last year approached, I knew the annual family performance was coming. The questions about my little tutoring business, the concerned looks when I didn't have traditional corporate achievements to share, the subtle suggestions that maybe it was time to think about other options. I'd been playing this role for 4 years, and honestly, I was getting tired of it. But I also wasn't ready to reveal the truth. Once that cat was out of the bag, there would be no going back. The family dynamic would shift permanently. Suddenly, I'd become the successful one, the one everyone looked to for financial advice, business connections, and probably monetary assistance. The comfortable anonymity I'd enjoyed would disappear forever. What I didn't anticipate was that the decision would be taken out of my hands entirely, in the most unexpected and dramatic way possible, right in the middle of Christmas dinner at my parents' house, with the entire extended family watching. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The week leading up to Christmas last year was particularly intense at AES Education Technologies. We were in the final stages of closing our biggest contract yet, a 3-year deal with the Texas Department of Education worth $2.8 million. The negotiations had been ongoing for 6 months, involving multiple stakeholder meetings, technical demonstrations, and endless rounds of contract revisions. Marcus was practically living at the office, coordinating with our legal team and the state's procurement department. Our technology director, Jennifer Park, was running final stress tests on our platform to ensure it could handle the massive user load that would come with serving over 200,000 students across Texas. Meanwhile, I was juggling conference calls with state officials, reviewing financial projections, and preparing for what would be the largest expansion in our company's history. "Sarah, we need your approval on the final server infrastructure costs," Jennifer said during our Tuesday morning meeting. "If this Texas deal goes through, we're looking at scaling up our hosting capacity by 400%. The initial investment is significant, but the long-term revenue projections justify it." I reviewed the numbers quickly. A $180,000 upfront investment in server infrastructure with ongoing monthly costs of $25,000. 2 years ago, those figures would have kept me awake at night. Now they were simply another line item in our growth strategy. "Approved," I said without hesitation. "What's our timeline for implementation?" 2 weeks if we start immediately, Jennifer replied. "Which means I'll be spending Christmas Eve configuring databases, but hey, that's the entrepreneur life, right?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, making decisions involving hundreds of thousands of dollars, while my family was probably planning to ask me how my little tutoring thing was going over Christmas dinner. Wednesday brought even bigger news. Our marketing director, Alex Thompson, rushed into my office with his laptop, barely containing his excitement. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this. Remember that article Forbes was writing about innovative edtech companies? We made the list. Not just made it, we're featured as one of the top 5 disruptive education technology companies to watch in the coming year." I stared at his screen, reading the headline, 5 EdTech Startups Reshaping American Education. There, prominently featured, was AES Education Technologies, complete with our company logo and a detailed write-up about our innovative approach to personalized learning. The article described me as, quote, "a visionary CEO who's quietly revolutionizing how students access premium educational support," and highlighted our impressive revenue growth and innovative technology platform. They quoted industry experts praising our business model and predicted we'd be, quote, "a major player in the educational technology space within the next 5 years." "This is huge," Alex continued. "Forbes has a readership of over 37 million. This kind of exposure could triple our client inquiries in the next quarter. I've already started getting interview requests from other publications." I felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. This was exactly the kind of recognition every entrepreneur dreams of. But it also meant my secret was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Forbes articles don't stay hidden, especially when family members occasionally browse business news. "Let's be strategic about follow-up interviews," I said carefully. "I want to maintain some privacy while capitalizing on the exposure. Screen all requests through me before responding." Thursday's board meeting with our investor group brought another milestone. We had 3 angel investors who'd bought into the company during our second year, including Patricia Wu, a former Google executive who'd become an invaluable mentor. "Sarah, I have to say, these numbers are extraordinary," Patricia said, reviewing our quarterly report. "Your growth trajectory is outpacing companies with 10 times your initial capital investment. Have you given any thought to Series A funding? With these metrics, you could easily secure 15 to 20 million in venture capital." The conversation that followed was surreal. We spent 2 hours discussing valuation models, market expansion strategies, and the possibility of opening offices in Austin and Seattle. Patricia suggested I consider hiring a chief financial officer to manage our increasingly complex financial operations. Another investor, Robert Kim, proposed we explore acquisition opportunities, smaller competitors we could absorb to accelerate our market penetration. By Friday afternoon, my assistant Emma Rodriguez was fielding calls from venture capital firms who'd read the Forbes article. Emma had been with us for 8 months, initially hired to manage my increasingly complex schedule and coordinate with our growing client base. She'd quickly proven herself invaluable, handling everything from travel arrangements to client communications with remarkable efficiency. "Sarah, I have Sequoia Capital online too," Emma said through my office intercom. "They want to schedule a meeting to discuss potential investment opportunities. Should I put them through, or would you prefer to call back?" Sequoia Capital, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, responsible for funding companies like Google, Apple, and Airbnb. 3 years ago, I would have fainted at the prospect of them calling my company. Now it was just another item on my increasingly packed schedule. "Schedule a call for Monday afternoon," I replied. "And Emma, please block out the entire afternoon. These conversations tend to run long." As Friday evening approached, I sat in my office reviewing the week's developments. A multi-million-dollar government contract nearly finalized. National recognition in Forbes. Interest from major venture capital firms. A company valuation that had probably tripled in the past 6 months. By any measure, it had been an extraordinary week in the life of a successful CEO. And yet, in less than 48 hours, I'd be sitting around my parents' dining room table, listening to Uncle Richard's unsolicited career advice and Cousin Jessica's passive-aggressive comments about my unstable career choice. The cognitive dissonance was becoming harder to bear. I'd built something remarkable, a company that was genuinely making a difference in students' lives, while generating substantial revenue and employing dozens of people. We weren't just successful, we were creating value, solving real problems, and building something sustainable for the long term. But my family would never see any of that, as long as I maintained this charade. To them, I'd always be Sarah the dreamer, Sarah the one who couldn't quite figure out her life, Sarah who needed their guidance and concern. Marcus knocked on my office door around 6 p.m., breaking me out of my contemplation. "Texas deal is officially signed," he announced, waving a thick contract folder. $2.8 million over 3 years, with options for renewal and expansion. Jennifer's already started the server scaling process, and I've scheduled orientation calls with their implementation team for the first week of January. We celebrated with expensive champagne in the conference room, toasting with the core team that had made this massive deal possible. Jennifer, Alex, Emma, and several other key employees joined us, everyone buzzing with excitement about what this contract meant for our company's future. "You know what this means, right?" Marcus said, raising his glass. "We're officially a major player now. This isn't a small business anymore. We're competing with companies that have been around for decades." As I looked around the room at this incredible team we'd assembled, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. These weren't just employees. They were talented professionals who'd chosen to bet their careers on the vision we were building together. Jennifer had left a senior position at Microsoft to join us. Alex had turned down offers from established marketing agencies. Emma had relocated from Phoenix to take this position. They believed in what we were creating, and their faith had been rewarded with rapid career growth, competitive salaries, and equity stakes in a company that was genuinely changing the educational landscape. But none of my family members knew any of this existed. Inel ipedicationale. Saturday morning brought an unexpected complication. My phone rang at 8 a.m., my mother calling, as she did every few weeks to check in and dispense unsolicited life advice. "Hi, sweetheart. Mom's voice carried that particular tone of concerned optimism she used when discussing my career. "I wanted to confirm you're still coming for Christmas dinner tomorrow. Aunt Monica is bringing her famous green bean casserole, and Uncle Richard said he has some job leads he wants to discuss with you." My stomach tightened. Job leads? Yes, his company is hiring for several positions in their marketing department. Entry level, but with good growth potential and excellent benefits. He thinks you might be a perfect fit, given your business background and all that experience you've gained with your tutoring venture. I closed my eyes, imagining the conversation. Uncle Richard, in his element, explaining how I could transition from my little side business into a real career, with stability and benefits. The condescending kindness in his voice as he outlined a career path that would represent a massive step backward from where I actually was. "That's thoughtful of him," I managed. "I'll definitely hear him out." Wonderful. "And Sarah, honey, I know this entrepreneurship thing has been important to you, but there's no shame in pivoting to something more traditional. You've learned a lot about business, and that experience would be valuable in a corporate setting. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit when it's time to try a different approach." After hanging up, I sat on my couch, staring at my laptop screen where the Forbes article was still open. The disconnect was becoming unbearable. My mother was essentially suggesting I abandon a multi-million-dollar company to take an entry-level marketing job at Uncle Richard's tech company. The really frustrating part was that I couldn't even be angry with them. Their concern was genuine, their advice well-intentioned. From their perspective, I'd been struggling with an unstable small business for 4 years, and they wanted to help me find security and success. They had no way of knowing that I was already more successful than most of them could imagine, because I'd deliberately hidden that success to avoid exactly the kind of complicated family dynamics that wealth and achievement often create. But as Christmas Eve arrived and I prepared for another performance as Sarah the struggling entrepreneur, I found myself wondering if it was time to stop living this double life. The weight of maintaining the deception was becoming heavier than the complications that might come with revealing the truth. What I didn't know was that the decision would be made for me in less than 24 hours, in the most dramatic and unexpected way possible. Christmas Eve morning arrived with the kind of crisp winter air that Sacramento rarely experiences. I woke up in my downtown apartment, a sleek, modern space I'd carefully chosen to be nice enough for my actual income level, but modest enough that family members wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions if they ever visited. The apartment perfectly embodied my double life. The living room looked like any successful young professional space. Quality furniture, tasteful artwork, a good sound system. But hidden in my home office were the real indicators of my success. Multiple monitors displaying real-time analytics from our platform, a professional-grade video conferencing setup for investor calls, and a wall-mounted whiteboard covered in strategic planning notes that would make any MBA program proud. As I made coffee in my high-end kitchen that I'd told my parents was a good deal on last year's model, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Even on Christmas Eve, she was working, a dedication that frankly put me to shame sometimes. "Sarah, quick update. The Forbes article has generated 47 qualified leads since yesterday. I've been screening them and created a priority list for follow-up next week. Also, Texas implementation team wants to schedule a kickoff call for December 27th. Too soon, or should I book it?" I typed back quickly, "Book it. And Emma, take Christmas Day completely off. No emails, no calls. That's an order from your CEO." Her response came immediately, "Yes, ma'am. Merry Christmas, boss." The casual use of CEO in text form made me smile. In the office, the team had naturally evolved to calling me Sarah in informal settings and boss or CEO during meetings or when dealing with external contacts. It had become so natural that I sometimes forgot how surreal it would sound to my family, who still thought I was running a small tutoring operation out of my spare bedroom. Around 10 a.m., I began the ritual of preparing for family Christmas, both mentally and practically. The mental preparation involved shifting into my struggling entrepreneur persona, complete with carefully calibrated stories about business challenges and modest aspirations. The practical preparation was more complex. I needed to temporarily hide any evidence of my actual success level. I started by swapping out my everyday watch, a sleek Apple Watch Ultra that I used for everything from approving expense reports to joining video calls, for an older model that looked appropriately budget-conscious. My everyday purse, a beautiful leather bag that had cost more than some people's monthly rent, went into the closet, replaced by a perfectly nice but unremarkable alternative I kept specifically for family events. The car situation required more creativity. My daily driver was a Tesla Model S that I'd purchased earlier that year. Not ostentatious, but definitely beyond what a struggling small business owner should be driving. For family events, I borrowed my neighbor's Honda Accord. Janet was a retired teacher who rarely drove on weekends, and we'd worked out an arrangement where I'd handle her car maintenance in exchange for occasional borrowing privileges. "Playing poor again for the family?" Janet asked with a knowing smile as I picked up her keys. She was one of the few people who knew about my double life, having witnessed enough late-night work calls and expensive business deliveries to piece together that my financial situation wasn't what I claimed. "Just maintaining the peace," I replied, slightly embarrassed. "Once they know the truth, everything changes. Christmas becomes about money instead of family." Janet, who'd taught high school for 37 years, nodded sagely. "I've seen plenty of families torn apart by success. Sometimes being the rich relative is harder than being the poor one. Everyone's got their hand out, and every gift becomes a statement." As I drove the familiar route to my parents' house in Roseville, I mentally rehearsed the conversations I'd likely have. Uncle Richard would definitely bring up those job opportunities at his company. I'd need to sound interested but not desperate, grateful but not overeager. Cousin Jessica would probably make some passive-aggressive comment about still playing with that little business idea, and I'd need to respond with just the right mix of determination and uncertainty. The most challenging part was always talking to Dad. David Chen had built his identity around being the successful provider, the one who'd worked his way up through the corporate ranks to achieve solid middle-class stability. In his worldview, real success looked like his career path: steady employment, regular promotions, predictable retirement planning. My entrepreneurial journey didn't just confuse him, it worried him deeply. Mom was different, but equally challenging. Linda Chen approached my career with the kind of loving concern that somehow managed to be both supportive and undermining simultaneously. She'd ask detailed questions about my little business, offer suggestions for scaling back to something more manageable, and frequently share stories about other young people who'd found their footing in traditional careers. The worst part was that their concern was genuine. They weren't trying to undermine me. They were trying to help someone they perceived as struggling. From their perspective, I'd been spinning my wheels for 4 years, pursuing an unstable dream while watching my college classmates advance in traditional careers. I pulled into their driveway at exactly 1 p.m. as requested. The house looked exactly as it had for the past 15 years. Immaculately maintained, appropriately decorated for the season, a perfect example of successful suburban middle-class life. Christmas lights twinkled around the roofline, and I could see Mom's shadow moving around the kitchen, probably making last-minute adjustments to what would undoubtedly be a perfect dinner. Dad answered the door with his characteristic mixture of warmth and barely concealed worry. "Sarah, right on time. How was the drive? No car troubles, I hope?" The question about car troubles wasn't casual. He genuinely worried about my ability to maintain a reliable vehicle on what he assumed was my inconsistent income. "Drive was fine, Dad. Thanks for asking." I hugged him, noting the slight stiffness that always appeared when he was preparing to have a serious conversation about my life choices. Mom emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron, and enveloped me in one of her characteristic overwhelming hugs. "Sweetheart, you look thin. Are you eating enough? I know money can be tight when you're building a business, but you can't skip meals." The assumption that I was struggling financially was so automatic, so unquestioned, that correcting it would have seemed completely out of left field. Instead, I smiled and assured her I was eating fine, accepting her motherly concern as the price of maintaining my cover story. Uncle Richard and Aunt Monica arrived 30 minutes later, followed shortly by Cousin Jessica and her husband Kevin. The extended family dynamics kicked into gear immediately, the careful dance of catching up on everyone's achievements while maintaining appropriate levels of family competitiveness. Uncle Richard had recently been promoted to Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at his tech company, a title he managed to work into conversation within the first 5 minutes. Aunt Monica had completed her master's degree in educational administration and was being considered for a vice principal position. Jessica had broken her personal sales record for the third consecutive quarter and was eyeing a promotion to regional sales manager. And then there was me, the family underachiever, still playing around with that tutoring thing. "Sarah," Uncle Richard said, settling into Dad's favorite armchair with the confidence of someone about to dispense valuable wisdom. "I've been thinking about your situation. This entrepreneurship phase has been a great learning experience, but it might be time to consider transitioning those skills into a more stable environment. Here it comes," I thought, arranging my expression into one of polite interest. "My company is expanding the marketing department," he continued. 3 new positions, all with excellent growth potential. Starting salary is $58,000, with full benefits and a clear promotion track. With your business experience, even though it's been in a small-scale environment, you'd be a strong candidate." The number hit me like a physical blow. $58,000. Less than what I'd paid Jennifer in her Christmas bonus alone. Less than what our company generated in revenue every 6 days. Less than I'd spent on office furniture when we'd expanded our workspace earlier that year. But I arranged my features into grateful consideration. "That's really generous of you to think of me, Uncle Richard. Tell me more about the role." For the next 20 minutes, he outlined a position that would have represented the most soul-crushing career regression imaginable. Entry-level marketing coordinator, reporting to a middle manager, responsible for updating social media accounts and coordinating promotional materials. The kind of job that new college graduates fought over, being offered to someone who'd just closed a nearly $3 million contract. The best part, Uncle Richard concluded, is the stability. Regular paycheck, predictable hours, advancement opportunities based on performance. No more worrying about whether your business will survive from month to month. Mom nodded enthusiastically from the kitchen doorway. "It sounds perfect, Sarah. And you'd still be using your business knowledge, just in a more secure environment." Jessica, who'd been scrolling through her phone during most of Uncle Richard's presentation, looked up with what she probably thought was an encouraging smile. "Plus, you'd finally have coworkers your own age. It must get lonely working by yourself all the time." The assumption that I worked alone, that my little tutoring business was essentially a solo operation, would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly emblematic of how completely they misunderstood my actual situation. At that very moment, 43 employees were probably enjoying their Christmas Eve plans, many of them traveling with families, funded by the generous holiday bonuses I'd approved earlier that month. "I appreciate you all thinking of me," I said carefully. "It's definitely something to consider." Dad jumped in with his own perspective. "The thing is, sweetheart, there's no shame in recognizing when it's time to try a different approach. You've given this business thing a solid effort, and you've learned valuable skills. But maybe it's time to apply those skills in an environment where you can build real security." Real security. As if the $8.2 million in our company's accounts wasn't real. As if the equity stake I owned in a rapidly growing business wasn't security. As if the Forbes recognition and venture capital interest didn't represent a level of professional achievement that most people could only dream of. But from their perspective, I was a 29-year-old woman still chasing an impractical dream, while her more sensible peers were building stable careers and starting families. Their concern was rooted in love, which somehow made it even more frustrating. The conversation was interrupted by Mom's announcement that dinner would be ready in an hour, giving everyone time to, quote, catch up properly. I knew what that meant. More detailed discussions about everyone's career achievements, more subtle pressure for me to get realistic about my future, more well-intentioned advice about abandoning the path that had actually made me more successful than any of them realized. As the family dispersed into smaller conversation groups, I stepped outside onto the back patio, needing a moment to process the cognitive dissonance. The December air was sharp and clean, and I could hear neighborhood sounds, kids playing with Christmas presents, families arriving for their own celebrations, the distant hum of holiday life proceeding normally for people who weren't living elaborate double lives. I pulled out my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Marcus, along with a text. Emergency call with Texas team. Technical question about data migration. Can you hop on a quick call? The irony was perfect. While my family was inside discussing my need for career stability, my actual career was demanding my attention for a multi-million-dollar implementation that would impact hundreds of thousands of students. I called Marcus back, stepping further into the garden where I couldn't be overheard. "Sarah, thank God," Marcus answered immediately. "Texas implementation team has a question about our data encryption protocols. They need to ensure compliance with state privacy regulations before they can finalize the technical specifications." For the next 15 minutes, I found myself in the surreal position of providing technical leadership for a major government contract while standing in my parents' backyard, where my family was inside discussing my apparent need for an entry-level marketing job. "All right, I think that covers everything," Marcus concluded. "Sorry to interrupt your family time. I know how important Christmas is." "No problem," I replied, watching through the window as Uncle Richard gestured enthusiastically to Dad, probably continuing his career counseling session. Just ironic timing. As I hung up and prepared to rejoin the family gathering, I realized that this might be the last Christmas where I could maintain this charade. The Forbes article, the venture capital interest, the major contracts. My success was becoming too visible to hide indefinitely. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. So I took a deep breath, arranged my expression into one of grateful uncertainty, and prepared to rejoin the family discussion about my fictional career struggles. I had no idea that in less than 3 hours, the decision would be taken completely out of my hands. Dinner was served at exactly 3 p.m., as Mom had announced. The dining room table looked like something from a magazine spread. Gleaming china, perfectly folded napkins, and enough food to feed twice our number. Mom had outdone herself with honey-glazed ham, roasted vegetables, homemade dinner rolls, and her famous cranberry sauce that took 2 days to prepare properly. As we took our seats, I noticed the familiar arrangement. Dad at the head, Mom at the foot, and the rest of us distributed according to some unspoken family hierarchy. I found myself between Cousin Jessica and Aunt Monica, a positioning that I suspected wasn't accidental. Both had strong opinions about career choices and weren't shy about sharing them. The first 20 minutes proceeded smoothly enough. We discussed safe topics, the unusually mild December weather, Mom's new recipe modifications, Dad's recent golf game improvements, and Aunt Monica's classroom stories from the semester that had just ended. Uncle Richard regaled us with tales from his company's holiday party, complete with details about the executive bonuses and year-end celebrations. But I could feel the shift coming. There's a rhythm to family dinners, and we were approaching the part where individual achievements and future plans became the primary topic of conversation. It happened gradually, like a tide rolling in. "Jessica, tell everyone about your promotion opportunity," Mom said, while passing the green bean casserole. "I think it's so exciting when young people advance in their careers." Jessica lit up immediately. "Well, it's not official yet, but my regional manager has basically told me I'm first in line for the next district position that opens up. It would mean overseeing sales teams across 4 states, managing a budget of over $12 million, and a salary increase to somewhere around $140,000 annually." The table murmured appropriate congratulations. Uncle Richard beamed with paternal pride, and Aunt Monica asked thoughtful questions about Jessica's management philosophy. It was a perfectly normal family celebration of professional success. "And Kevin," Dad added, turning to Jessica's husband, "how's the accounting firm treating you?" Kevin, who'd been quietly working through his second helping of ham, swallowed before responding. "Really well, actually. Made senior associate this year, and they're talking about fast-tracking me toward partner. The workload is intense, especially during tax season, but the trajectory is solid. More congratulations, more proud family exchanges." The conversation had that warm, supportive energy that comes from celebrating genuine achievements among people you care about. Then Uncle Richard turned his attention to me. "Sarah, we've talked a bit about potential opportunities, but I'm curious, how would you honestly assess where your business stands right now? I mean, after 4 years, you must have a clear sense of whether this is working long-term." The question was posed gently, but I could hear the underlying assumption. After 4 years, a real business would have either succeeded obviously or failed obviously. The fact that I seemed to be perpetually still working on it suggested, from his perspective, that I was probably struggling to admit defeat. I took a sip of wine, buying myself a moment to formulate a response that would maintain my cover story without outright lying. "It's been a learning process," I said carefully. "The education market is complicated, and building sustainable systems takes time." "But are you making money?" Aunt Monica asked bluntly. She'd always been the most direct member of the family, a trait that served her well as a high school administrator but made family gatherings occasionally uncomfortable. "I mean, enough to live on comfortably?" The question hung in the air. Everyone was looking at me with expressions of concerned interest. They weren't trying to embarrass me. They genuinely wanted to understand my situation so they could offer appropriate help and guidance. "I'm managing," I replied, which was technically true. I was definitely managing a multi-million-dollar company. Jessica jumped in with what she probably thought was supportive insight. "You know, Sarah, there's no shame in pivoting. Some of the most successful people I know tried entrepreneurship first and then brought those skills into corporate environments. It shows initiative and creativity." "Absolutely," Kevin agreed. "My firm actually prefers hiring people with some business experience, even if it didn't work out. It demonstrates risk tolerance and strategic thinking." The phrase, "even if it didn't work out," hit me like a small slap. In their minds, my business had already failed. I just hadn't admitted it yet. They were essentially discussing how I could best salvage some value from my failed entrepreneurial attempt. Dad leaned forward with the expression he wore when dispensing particularly important fatherly advice. "The thing is, sweetheart, there comes a point where persistence becomes stubbornness. I admire your determination, but I worry that you're missing opportunities while chasing something that might not be realistic." "What Dad's trying to say," Mom added gently, "is that we love you regardless of how this business thing turns out. You don't have to prove anything to us. Sometimes the bravest choice is knowing when to change direction." I nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of someone seriously considering their wisdom. But internally, I was calculating. The revenue we generated in the time since I'd sat down for this dinner was probably more than Dad's monthly salary. The unrealistic business they were encouraging me to abandon had just been featured in Forbes and was fielding calls from venture capital firms. Uncle Richard seemed to sense an opening for his most persuasive argument. "Here's what I think, Sarah. Take that marketing coordinator position I mentioned. Give it 18 months, long enough to really learn the corporate environment and build some solid professional relationships. If you still want to pursue entrepreneurship after that, you'll be doing it from a position of financial stability with real industry connections. Plus," Jessica added, "you'd have colleagues your own age. I can't imagine how isolating it must be working alone all the time. At least in a corporate environment, you'd have mentorship opportunities and peer relationships. Working alone." The assumption was so completely wrong that I almost laughed. That morning, I'd approved holiday bonuses for a team of professionals who'd chosen to work with me because they believed in what we were building together. Jennifer had turned down opportunities at major tech companies to lead our technology development. Marcus had left a six-figure consulting position to help build something meaningful in education. But to my family, I was a lonely solo entrepreneur, probably working from my kitchen table, struggling to make ends meet while stubbornly pursuing an impossible dream. "You know what I think the real issue is?" Aunt Monica said, warming to the topic. "Sarah's generation was told they could all be entrepreneurs and follow their passions. But the reality is, most businesses fail. The statistics are brutal. What is it, 80% of small businesses don't survive 5 years?" "Exactly," Uncle Richard agreed. "And that's not Sarah's fault. The whole follow your dreams culture sets people up for disappointment. Sometimes the most responsible thing is choosing stability over passion." I felt something snap inside me. Not anger, exactly, but a sudden clarity about how absurd this conversation had become. Here were people I loved, people whose opinions I respected in many areas of life, essentially conducting an intervention for a problem that didn't exist. They were trying to save me from a failure that was actually the biggest success any of us had achieved. "I appreciate everyone's concern," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "But I think you might be making some assumptions about my situation that aren't accurate." Dad raised an eyebrow. "What kind of assumptions?" This was dangerous territory. I could feel the conversation approaching a cliff edge, where I'd either have to continue the deception with increasingly elaborate lies, or start revealing truths that would change everything. "Well," I said slowly, "you're assuming that I'm struggling financially, for instance, or that I'm working alone, or that the business isn't growing. Are those assumptions wrong?" Mom asked gently, but with the tone of someone who already knew the answer. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Not the gentle buzz of a text message, but the actual ringtone I'd assigned to Emma's number. A distinctive sound that I'd trained myself to answer immediately, because it usually meant something important was happening with the business. Everyone looked at my phone, then at me. In the split second of silence, I realized I had a choice. I could let it go to voicemail and continue this increasingly uncomfortable conversation, or I could answer it and risk exposing the professional nature of my actual life. The phone rang again. Emma wouldn't call during Christmas dinner unless it was genuinely urgent. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching for the phone. "This might be important." I saw the disapproving looks exchanged around the table. In the Chen family, taking phone calls during dinner was considered deeply rude unless someone was literally dying. But Emma's calls usually involved decisions that affected dozens of employees and thousands of students. "Hello, this is Sarah," I answered, stepping away from the table toward the kitchen. Emma's voice was crisp and professional, despite the holiday. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation with the Texas implementation. Their IT department needs immediate clarification on our data migration timeline, and they're threatening to delay the entire project launch if they don't get answers today." I could hear the family conversation continuing in the dining room, probably discussing my rude behavior in taking a business call during Christmas dinner. But Emma was right to call. A delay in the Texas launch could cost us millions and damage our reputation with government clients. "What specifically do they need?" I asked, already shifting into CEO mode. "Technical specifications for the server migration process. They want confirmation that we can handle their user load without downtime during the transition." Jennifer prepared a detailed technical brief, but they want it approved by the CEO before they'll accept it. I glanced back toward the dining room, where my family was probably speculating about what kind of business emergency I could possibly have. In their minds, I was likely dealing with a disgruntled parent or a tutoring scheduling conflict. "Send me the brief," I said. "I'll review it and send back approval within 30 minutes. Already in your email." "And Sarah? I know this is your family time, but the client specifically requested CEO approval. They won't accept it from anyone else. CEO approval." The words hung in the air as I realized that my family's conversation had gone quiet in the dining room. I turned and saw them all looking at me with expressions of confusion and curiosity. "Yes, of course," I said to Emma, maintaining my professional tone. "I'll handle it immediately." As I hung up, Uncle Richard called out from the dining room. "Everything okay, Sarah? That sounded pretty serious for a tutoring business." I walked back to the table, feeling the weight of their collective gaze. This was the moment. I could either construct another elaborate explanation about why my small tutoring operation required CEO-level approvals, or I could finally tell them the truth. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed with a text message. The notification sound echoed in the sudden silence of the dining room, and I glanced down automatically. The message was from Marcus. "Sarah, Forbes just published a follow-up piece featuring you as CEO to watch in 2024. Congratulations, boss." The text was visible on my lock screen, and Jessica, sitting right next to me, had read it. "CEO to watch?" she said slowly, her voice carrying a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Sarah, what exactly is your business?" Every person at that table was now staring at me with undivided attention. The moment I'd been avoiding for 4 years had finally arrived, and it had come in the most unexpected way possible. There was no going back now. The silence that followed Jessica's question felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Every face around the table wore the same expression of confused curiosity, as if they were trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. I looked down at my phone screen, where Marcus's text was still glowing. "Sarah, Forbes just published a follow-up piece featuring you as CEO to watch in 2024. Congratulations, boss." The word boss seemed to pulse on the screen like a neon sign. Sarah? Mom's voice carried that particular tone of maternal concern, mixed with growing suspicion. What's Jessica talking about? What does CEO to watch mean? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, with my family staring up at me expectantly. 4 years of carefully constructed deception were about to crumble, and I realized I had two choices. I could try to construct one more elaborate lie, or I could finally tell them the truth. But before I could make that decision, my phone rang again. This time it was Jennifer's number, my technology director, calling on Christmas Day. The ringtone cut through the dining room silence like an alarm. I need to take this, I said, my voice sounding strange even to myself. Sarah? Dad said firmly. Whoever it is can wait. We're having a family discussion here. But I was already answering the call, partly because Jennifer wouldn't call unless it was genuinely critical, and partly because I needed a moment to figure out how to handle what was about to happen. Jennifer, what's going on? Sarah, I'm so sorry to bother you on Christmas, but we have a critical situation. The Texas servers just went offline, and their entire IT team is in panic mode. They're saying if we can't get the system back online and stable within the next 2 hours, they're going to invoke the penalty clause and potentially cancel the entire contract. My blood went cold. The Texas contract represented not just revenue, but credibility with government clients nationwide. If we lost it due to technical failures, the reputation damage could set us back years. What's the status of our backup systems? I asked, already shifting into crisis management mode. Backup servers are operational, but the data migration is only 73% complete. If we switch now, they'll lose approximately 6 weeks of user data input. If we wait for the primary servers to come back online, we risk missing their deadline for system stability certification. I closed my eyes, running through the options quickly. This was exactly the kind of high-stakes decision that CEOs get paid to make, balancing immediate technical solutions against long-term strategic consequences, with millions of dollars and dozens of jobs hanging in the balance. Switch to backup systems immediately, I decided. We'll eat the cost of recreating the lost data rather than risk losing the entire contract. Get Marcus on a call with their project manager to explain the situation and our recovery timeline. I want hourly updates until this is resolved. Copy that, boss. I'll coordinate with Marcus and have a full technical brief ready for your review within the hour. As I hung up, I became aware that the entire dining room had gone completely silent. When I looked up, 7 pairs of eyes were staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. A mixture of confusion, surprise, and dawning realization. Uncle Richard was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah, that conversation, that didn't sound like someone running a small tutoring business. Kevin leaned forward slightly. You were talking about servers, data migration, multi-million-dollar contracts. What exactly do you do? I stood there holding my phone, acutely aware that this was the moment everything would change. The comfortable family dynamic we'd maintained for 4 years was about to shatter completely. I started, then stopped. How do you explain that you've been lying about your entire professional life for years? How do you tell people who've been offering you career advice that you're actually more successful than they've ever imagined? Aunt Monica, ever the direct one, cut straight to the heart of it. Sarah, are you actually successful? Have you been lying to us this entire time? The bluntness of the question somehow made it easier to answer. Yes, I said simply. I've been lying to you for 4 years. The admission hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Dad's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, hurt, anger, and something that might have been embarrassment. What do you mean, lying? I mean, I said, taking a deep breath, that AES Education Technologies isn't a small tutoring business. It's an educational technology company with 43 employees, multi-million-dollar government contracts, and venture capital firms competing to invest in us. I'm not struggling to make ends meet. I'm the CEO of one of the fastest-growing edtech companies in California. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the hum of Mom's refrigerator in the kitchen, even the distant sound of neighborhood kids playing with Christmas presents. Jessica was the first to recover her voice. Multi-million-dollar contracts? Are you serious? The contract we were just discussing, the one I might lose if we don't fix this technical issue, is worth $2.8 million over 3 years with the Texas Department of Education. We're implementing our learning platform for over 200,000 students across the state. Uncle Richard's face had gone pale. $2.8 million? That's just one contract, I continued, feeling a strange mixture of relief and terror at finally telling the truth. Our total revenue last year was $4.2 million. This year we're projected to hit $6.8 million. Mom sat down heavily in her chair as if her legs had suddenly stopped working. $6.8 million? Sarah, that's more than your father and I make combined in 10 years. I know. Dad's voice was very quiet when he spoke. How long has this been going on? The company has been profitable for 3 years. We hit our first million in annual revenue 2 years ago, but I've been downplaying it to you since the beginning, because I knew this would happen. I gestured around the table. I knew everything would change once you found out. What would change? Aunt Monica asked, though her tone suggested she was beginning to understand. This, I said. This exact conversation, the way you're all looking at me right now. The fact that I just went from being Sarah who needs our help and guidance to Sarah who's more successful than any of us. The family dynamic we've had for 4 years just died in the last 5 minutes. Kevin was shaking his head slowly. So when we were giving you career advice, when Richard was offering you that marketing job, I was sitting there trying not to laugh, I admitted. Uncle Richard, you offered me a $58,000 marketing coordinator position this afternoon. I paid my employees more than that in Christmas bonuses this year. Uncle Richard's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. Jessica's voice had a sharp edge when she spoke. So you've been sitting here for years, letting us feel sorry for you, letting us worry about your future, letting us offer you help and advice, while you were secretly richer than all of us combined? It wasn't about the money, I protested. It was about maintaining normal family relationships. Once people know you're wealthy, everything changes. Every gift becomes a statement. Every dinner check becomes awkward. People start asking for loans, for investments, for business advice. Family gatherings become networking opportunities. But we're your family, Mom said, her voice hurt and confused. We love you regardless of money. Why would you think we'd treat you differently? The question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have a good answer that wouldn't sound insulting, because the truth was, I had thought they'd treat me differently. I had assumed they'd become uncomfortable, resentful, or financially dependent, and maybe I'd been wrong about that, but it was too late to find out now. Look at how you're treating me right now, I said finally. 5 minutes ago, I was someone you needed to help and protect. Now I'm someone you feel deceived by. The relationship has already changed completely. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, he said, and walked out of the dining room toward the back patio. The rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Uncle Richard spoke. Sarah, I have to ask. When you said you appreciated my job offer, were you mocking me? No, I said quickly. I was grateful that you cared enough to try to help. But yes, it was difficult to respond appropriately when the position would have been such a massive step backward professionally. A step backward, he repeated slowly. From CEO to marketing coordinator would be a step backward. Richard, Aunt Monica said quietly. She's trying to explain. No, it's fine, Uncle Richard interrupted. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that I've been offering career advice to someone who's more successful than I'll ever be. That's humbling. Jessica was scrolling through her phone rapidly. Holy shit, she said, then immediately looked up apologetically at Mom. Sorry. But Sarah, you're in Forbes. There's an article here about 5 edtech CEOs disrupting American education, and you're number 2 on the list. She held up her phone, showing a professional headshot of me that had been taken for our company website 6 months ago. In the photo, I was wearing a crisp business suit, sitting in our conference room, looking every inch the successful executive. This says your company has, quote, revolutionized personalized learning through innovative technology platforms, and that you're a visionary leader in the educational technology space, Jessica read aloud. It quotes you talking about scaling sustainable solutions for underserved student populations. Mom reached over and took Jessica's phone, staring at the article with an expression of complete bewilderment. This is really you? This is really your company? Yes. And you've been hiding this from us for years? Yes. The weight of the admission settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I could see each family member processing the information differently. Dad's hurt and confusion, Mom's maternal worry about why I'd felt the need to hide, Uncle Richard's professional embarrassment, Aunt Monica's practical assessment of the situation, Jessica's mixture of admiration and resentment, and Kevin's quiet amazement. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Emma. Update. Backup systems stable. Texas team satisfied with recovery timeline. Crisis averted. Enjoy your family dinner, CEO. The notification sound made everyone look at me again, and I realized that even now, in the middle of this family revelation, my actual job was continuing. While we sat here processing the emotional fallout of my deception, my company was solving problems, serving clients, and moving forward with the business that had made all of this possible. I should probably go check on Dad, I said, standing up from the table. Sarah, Mom called as I headed toward the patio door. We need to finish this conversation. I know, I replied. But first, I need to make sure my company doesn't lose a $3 million contract, because I was busy explaining to my family why I'd been lying to them for 4 years. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on anyone, least of all me. But as I stepped outside to find Dad and try to repair the relationship damage I'd just caused, I couldn't help but think that maybe, finally, I could stop living 2 separate lives. Whether that would turn out to be a good thing or not remained to be seen. I found Dad standing at the far edge of the back patio, gripping the railing and staring out at the neighbor's yard where a group of kids was testing out new bicycles. His shoulders were rigid, and I could see the tension in the way he held himself, the posture of a man whose entire understanding of his family had just been upended. Dad? He didn't turn around immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and strained. How long have you been making more money than me, Sarah? The question hit harder than I'd expected. David Chen had built his identity around being the family provider, the one who'd worked his way up through the corporate ranks to achieve solid middle-class success. Learning that his daughter had not only surpassed his income, but had been hiding that fact for years, had to feel like a fundamental challenge to his role as patriarch. About 3 years, I said honestly. But Dad, that was never the point. 3 years. He turned to face me, and I could see hurt and confusion warring in his expression. For 3 years. You've been sitting at our dinner table, listening to me worry about your future, accepting my advice about career stability and financial planning, while you were making, what? 10 times my salary? It's not about the money, I said, stepping closer. It was never about showing you up or proving anything. I just wanted to maintain normal family relationships. Dad laughed, but there was no humor in it. Normal? Sarah, what's normal about lying to your family for years? What's normal about letting us worry ourselves sick about your future, while you were secretly more successful than we ever dreamed? I could hear the pain beneath his anger, and it made my chest tight. I was trying to protect us from exactly this conversation. Look how everything's changed already. 5 minutes ago, you saw me as your daughter who needed guidance. Now you see me as, what? A stranger who's been deceiving you? I see you as someone I apparently don't know at all. Dad's voice cracked slightly. Do you have any idea how this feels? For 3 years, I've been lying awake at night sometimes, worried about whether you were eating enough, whether you could afford your rent, whether you'd ever be able to buy a house or start a family on your inconsistent income. And the whole time, he trailed off, shaking his head. The whole time I was fine, I finished. Better than fine, I was thriving. But I knew that if you found out, everything would change. And I was right, wasn't it? Everything has changed. Before Dad could respond, the patio door slid open behind us. Mom stepped out, her face pale but determined. Your sister called, she said to Dad. She saw the Forbes article. Apparently, Sarah's success has been making industry news for months, and we had no idea. Dad closed his eyes. Of course it has. Monica wants to know if we knew about this all along, Mom continued. She's confused about why we never mentioned it during family conversations. The complexity of the situation was growing by the minute. It wasn't just our immediate family dynamic that had been built on my deception. Extended family relationships, holiday conversations, and years of shared family narratives were all suddenly revealed to be based on false information. What did you tell her? I asked. The truth. That we're just finding out ourselves. Mom's voice carried a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. Sarah, do you understand that this affects more than just us? Your cousins, your aunts and uncles. Everyone has been operating under the assumption that you were struggling. We've all been worried about you, talking about you, trying to think of ways to help you. The weight of unintended consequences was settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. I'd been so focused on managing my immediate family's perception that I hadn't fully considered how my deception rippled out through our extended network. I know, I said quietly. I didn't think it through completely. Dad turned back toward the yard, his jaw working. What I don't understand is why you didn't trust us. Did you really think we'd love you less if you were successful? Did you think we'd suddenly become… what? Greedy, jealous? The question forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own assumptions. I thought things would get complicated, I admitted. I thought you'd start treating me differently, expecting different things from me. I thought every family gathering would become about my business, my money, my success. I wanted to just be your daughter, not Sarah the CEO. But you are Sarah the CEO, Mom said gently. That's who you've become. And, by hiding it, you've robbed us of the chance to celebrate your achievements, to be proud of what you've built, to support you through the challenges of running a company. Her words hit me unexpectedly hard. In my effort to preserve our family relationships, I'd actually impoverished them. They'd missed years of sharing in my professional journey, understanding my actual daily life, and offering support for the real challenges I faced as a young CEO. My phone buzzed with an urgent text from Marcus. Sarah, need immediate decision on Texas recovery costs. Extra server time and emergency staffing will run about $45,000. Approve? I looked at the message, acutely aware that my parents were watching me. $45,000, more than Dad's monthly gross income, being requested as an emergency expense approval while we stood on their back patio discussing how my success had complicated our family relationships. I need to respond to this, I said, showing them the message. This is the crisis I mentioned during dinner. We're trying to prevent losing a major contract. Dad read the message over my shoulder. $45,000? For emergency expenses? It's expensive, but losing the contract would cost us nearly $3 million, I explained, typing back my approval to Marcus. Sometimes you have to spend money to save money. $3 million, Mom repeated slowly. Sarah, I don't think we really understood the scale of what you do. That's exactly what I was afraid of, I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Now every family conversation is going to include references to amounts of money that make everyone uncomfortable. This is why I didn't want you to know. Dad was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he said something I didn't expect. You know what the worst part is? I'm proud of you. Incredibly proud. My daughter built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. And I missed the whole thing. I missed being able to celebrate your first big contract, your first major hire, your first $1 million in revenue. I missed all of it because you didn't trust me enough to share it. The pain in his voice broke something inside me. I'd been so focused on protecting our relationship that I'd actually damaged it in a much deeper way. I'm sorry, I whispered. I thought I was doing the right thing. I know you did, Mom said, stepping closer. But, honey, families are supposed to share the big things, both the struggles and the successes. By hiding your success, you've been carrying the weight of everything alone. That can't have been easy. She was right. The isolation of managing a growing company while pretending to struggle had been exhausting in ways I'd never fully acknowledged. I'd celebrated major milestones with my team, but I'd never been able to share them with the people who'd raised me and shaped my values. The patio door opened again, and Uncle Richard stepped out, looking uncertain. Sorry to interrupt, but Jessica found something else online that's, well, you should probably see it. We followed him back inside, where Jessica was holding her phone with an expression of amazement. Sarah, there's a video interview you did with TechCrunch 3 months ago about the future of educational technology. You're sitting in what looks like a really impressive office, talking about scaling your platform nationally and expanding into international markets. She handed me the phone, and I found myself watching a professional interview I'd completely forgotten about. On screen, I was confident, articulate, and clearly successful, sitting in our conference room, wearing a tailored business suit, discussing strategic expansion plans with the kind of authority that comes from running a thriving company. You look so different, Aunt Monica observed. Professional, confident, like a completely different person than the one we've been talking to at family dinners. She was right. The woman in the video was polished, strategic, and comfortable discussing complex business concepts. She bore little resemblance to the modest, uncertain entrepreneur I'd been playing at family gatherings. Because I was acting, I said simply. At family events, I was playing a role. That person in the video, that's who I actually am professionally. Kevin was shaking his head in apparent disbelief. Sarah, in this interview you're talking about hiring plans, international expansion, partnerships with major universities. This isn't just a successful small business. This is a major company. I know. And you've been pretending to struggle for years? I haven't been pretending to struggle, I corrected. Running a company is legitimately difficult. I've had plenty of real challenges, sleepless nights, and stressful decisions. I just haven't been struggling financially. Jessica was scrolling through more search results. There are dozens of articles about you. Industry publications, business magazines, even a podcast interview about women entrepreneurs in tech. Sarah, you're like famous in your industry. The room fell silent as everyone processed this new level of revelation. It was one thing to learn that I was financially successful. It was another to discover that I'd achieved a level of industry recognition and professional stature that none of them had even imagined possible. So when we were giving you career advice, Uncle Richard said slowly, you were already more accomplished professionally than any of us. I guess so, I admitted, but I never wanted to make anyone feel bad about that. I love that Uncle Richard is proud of his promotion, that Jessica is excited about her sales achievements, that Mom is passionate about her teaching. I didn't want my success to overshadow anyone else's accomplishments. But instead, Dad said quietly, you made us all feel like we were more successful than you. You let us feel superior while secretly being the most accomplished person in the room. The accusation stung because it contained truth I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. In my effort to avoid making anyone feel inferior, I'd created a situation where I was the one being condescended to, offered help I didn't need, and treated as someone who couldn't quite figure out her life. I didn't mean for it to work out that way, I said. I just wanted to keep things simple. Nothing about this is simple, Mom said. And now we have to figure out how to move forward from here. As if summoned by the universe's sense of irony, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but the caller ID showed Goldman Sachs Investment Banking. I stared at the phone, realizing that my two worlds were about to collide even more dramatically. I should probably take this, I said. It's likely about potential investment opportunities. Goldman Sachs? Dad repeated faintly. As I answered the call, I could feel my family watching me with expressions of continued amazement, hurt, and growing understanding that their perception of my life had been not just wrong, but completely inverted. The conversation I was about to have would only make that more clear. This is Sarah Chen, I answered, stepping toward the kitchen for some privacy, though I could feel 7 pairs of eyes following my every movement. Miss Chen, this is David Steinberg from Goldman Sachs. I apologize for calling on Christmas Day, but we've been following AES Education Technologies, and after reviewing your latest quarterly reports and the Forbes coverage, we'd like to discuss some significant investment opportunities. Would you have time for a call next week to explore potential partnerships? I glanced back at my family, who were all pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. Yes, I'd be interested in that conversation, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My assistant, Emma Rodriguez, can coordinate our schedules. I'll have her reach out to set up a meeting. Excellent. we're looking at a potential Series A round in the 15 to 25 million range. Depending on your expansion plans and market positioning, we believe AES has tremendous growth potential in the government contract space. $15 to $25 million. I could practically feel the collective gasp from the dining room, even though no one made a sound. That sounds like something worth exploring, I managed. I look forward to our conversation. As I hung up, the silence in the house was deafening. Even the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped ticking. Uncle Richard was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Did that man just offer you $25 million? It's not an offer, I clarified, walking back to rejoin the group. It's an investment discussion. They want to buy equity in the company to fuel expansion. $25 million, Jessica repeated slowly. Sarah, I don't even know how to process that number. Dad sat down heavily at the dining table, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. So let me understand this. While we've been worried about whether you can afford your rent, you've been running a company that Goldman Sachs wants to invest $25 million in? That's about the size of it, I admitted. Mom was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Sweetheart, I think we need to start this whole conversation over. We don't know who you are anymore. Her words cut deep because they contained a fundamental truth. The person they thought they knew, struggling entrepreneur Sarah who needed guidance and support, had never really existed. The real me was someone they'd never had the chance to meet. I'm still the same person, I said quietly. I'm still your daughter who likes your cranberry sauce and remembers every birthday and calls you every Sunday. The only thing that's different is that you now know what I actually do for work. That's not a small thing, Sarah, Aunt Monica said. Your career is a huge part of who you are. It affects how you spend your time, what stresses you face, what accomplishments you're proud of. By hiding it, you've hidden a major part of your identity. Kevin leaned forward, his analytical accountant mind clearly working through the implications. Can I ask, what does this mean for your lifestyle? I mean, if you're running a multi-million-dollar company, why do you still live in that modest apartment? Why drive that Honda Civic? It was a fair question, and one that got to the heart of how I'd managed to maintain my deception for so long. Because I didn't want anyone to figure out what I actually earned, I said. If I'd started living like someone with my income, questions would have been asked. So I kept my lifestyle simple and put most of my money into investments and business growth. Most of your money, Dad repeated. Sarah, what do you actually make? I hesitated. We'd already crossed so many lines today, revealed so many secrets. But this felt like the final boundary. The one that, once crossed, would make it impossible to ever go back to seeing each other the same way. Last year, between salary and profit distributions, about 1.2 million, I said finally. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I could see each family member trying to process what that meant, comparing it to their own incomes, their own financial struggles, and aspirations. Jessica was the first to recover. Jesus, Sarah, I've been bragging about making 6 figures while you've been making 7. It's not a competition, I said quickly. Your success is still success. My income doesn't diminish your achievements. But it does change the context, Uncle Richard said thoughtfully. When I offered you that marketing job this afternoon, I was trying to help someone I thought was struggling. Now I realize I was basically offering a CEO a demotion to entry-level work. The embarrassment in his voice made me want to disappear. This was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid. The awkwardness, the hurt feelings, the fundamental shift in how we related to each other. Uncle Richard, I was genuinely grateful that you cared enough to try to help, I said. That meant something, regardless of whether I needed the help. But you must have thought I was ridiculous, he said, offering career advice to someone more successful than I'll ever be. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another text. This time it was from Emma. Sarah, CNN Business just called. They want to do a feature story about young CEOs disrupting traditional industries. Should I schedule? I looked at the message, then at my family's expectant faces. The irony was perfect. While we sat here trying to figure out how to rebuild our relationships after years of deception, the business world was continuing to recognize and celebrate exactly the success I'd been hiding. CNN Business wants to interview me, I said, showing them the text. Mom shook her head in apparent disbelief. CNN, my daughter is going to be on CNN. If I say yes to the interview, I clarified, which I'm not sure I should, this whole thing is getting pretty overwhelming. Why wouldn't you say yes? Jessica asked. This is incredible recognition. Because, I said, gesturing around the table. Look what's happened in just one afternoon. My entire family is upset with me, our relationships are completely changed, and I'm fielding calls from investment bankers during Christmas dinner. Maybe there's something to be said for privacy. Dad was quiet for a long moment, then said something I didn't expect. Sarah, I've been thinking about this all wrong. What do you mean? I've been hurt that you didn't trust us with the truth. But maybe the real question is, why did you feel like you couldn't trust us? What did we do to make you think we'd react badly to your success? The question forced me to examine my own assumptions and prejudices. Had I been unfair to them? Had I underestimated their ability to handle my success gracefully? I thought you'd treat me differently, I said honestly. I thought every conversation would become about money, every family gathering would turn into business networking, every gift I gave would be analyzed for what it said about my wealth. I wanted to just be your daughter, not your successful daughter. But we could have learned to navigate that together, Mom said gently. Instead, you made the decision for all of us that we weren't capable of handling it. She was right, and it stung. In my effort to protect our relationships, I'd actually demonstrated a profound lack of faith in my family's maturity and love. Aunt Monica, ever the practical one, asked the question that was probably on everyone's mind. So what happens now? How do we move forward from here? It was a good question. The old dynamic was gone forever, but what would replace it? I think, I said slowly, we have to figure out how to be honest with each other going forward. I'll have to stop pretending to be someone I'm not, and you'll all have to adjust to knowing who I actually am. Will you take the CNN interview? Kevin asked. I thought about it. The old me, the one who'd spent 4 years hiding from success, would have declined. But maybe it was time to stop being afraid of visibility, recognition, and the complications that came with them. Yeah, I decided. I think I will. Dad smiled for the first time since this whole conversation began. Good. I'd like to watch my daughter on CNN. And the Goldman Sachs meeting? Jessica asked. I'll take that too. It's time to stop being afraid of growing the business, just because growth brings attention. Over the next hour, we had the conversation we probably should have had years ago. I told them about the real challenges of running a company, the sleepless nights worrying about employee livelihoods, the pressure of making decisions that affected thousands of students, the loneliness of being the person everyone looked to for answers. They shared their own fears about my choices, their genuine concerns about entrepreneurship and stability, and their regrets about missing so much of my journey. By the time we sat down to finish our interrupted Christmas dinner, something fundamental had shifted. The food was cold, but the conversation was warmer and more honest than it had been in years. You know what's funny? Uncle Richard said as we were clearing the table. I spent all afternoon trying to convince you to take a stable corporate job, and you're probably going to end up being more successful than anyone in my company's executive team. Success looks different for everyone, I replied. You've built a solid career and provided well for your family. That's its own kind of achievement. But, he said with a slight smile, if you ever need someone with corporate experience to join your management team, I might be interested in hearing about it. I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had all day. Uncle Richard, are you asking me for a job? Maybe, he said, grinning. Depends on what it pays. 3 months later, I was sitting in my office reviewing the final paperwork for our Series A funding round. Goldman Sachs had led a $22 million investment that would allow us to expand nationally and develop new product lines. The CNN interview had aired to positive response, generating hundreds of new client inquiries and 3 job offers from competing firms. More importantly, my relationships with my family had settled into something healthier and more honest. Dad had become one of my most trusted advisors, his decades of corporate experience providing valuable perspective on scaling operations. Mom had started volunteering with our financial literacy program, using her teaching skills to help young entrepreneurs avoid some of the pitfalls she'd watched me navigate. Uncle Richard had indeed joined our team as Director of Strategic Partnerships, bringing his corporate connections and project management expertise to help us land bigger contracts. Jessica had started referring potential clients from her pharmaceutical industry network, and Aunt Monica was consulting on our educational content development. The family dynamics had changed, just as I'd feared they would, but they'd changed in ways I never could have predicted, becoming stronger, more collaborative, and more genuinely supportive than they'd ever been when I was hiding my success. The lesson I learned was simple but profound. The people who love you want to celebrate your victories, not just comfort you through your struggles. By hiding my success, I'd robbed my family of the joy of sharing in my achievements and robbed myself of their support during the genuine challenges of building a company. As I sat in my office that day, reviewing contracts that would shape the next phase of AES Education Technology's growth, I realized that the most important business decision I'd ever made wasn't about funding or expansion or market strategy. It was the decision to finally let my family know who I really was. And that Christmas dinner conversation that had felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something much better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.